Welcome everyone to JSLH's hopefully marquee event of the semester. And we have here today gathered today for what looks like a very, hopefully a very special event, a special book discussion. And the three people whom we've invited today, who are the editors of this volume of essays where they have contributed, and many other people have written on various aspects of life in India today, in contemporary India today, and have dealt with some of the most complex and most challenging issues which are facing India in many different ways today. The book is called Reconciliation, Karwan, a Mohabbat's journey of solidarity through a wounded India. And firstly, I'd like to congratulate all the three editors for coming out with this book. Very well done, sir. And ma'am. Yeah. This, before I get into my questions, I very briefly want to introduce the three editors whom we've got today, who've contributed, who've worked on this book. On the panel will be people, Mr. Harsh Mandar, who's an extremely well-known human rights activist, civil society worker, and an author of some wonderful and very powerful books on Indian society today. So very warm welcome to you, sir, Mr. Mandar. We also have Mr. John Dayal, a very well-known journalist at one point of time, who quit journalism to become a human rights activist and a person who writes on these issues very deeply and very sensitively. He, along with Mr. Ajoy Bose, another veteran journalist of his, another very well-known journalist, have written one of the most important books on the emergency, on what happened with the press and with journalism during the emergency and its aftermath. And along with them, we have Natasha Badwar, who's worked for NDTV for a very long time, who's also the author of a book called My Daughter's Mum. And all three of them will introduce to us what this journey has been like, what is the philosophy behind this event, what is Karwan-e-Mohabbat, what has been its provenance, what is its present, what is its, what is its future. And without any further ado, I'd want, I think, all three of you in bits and parts to come and talk about this book and talk about the movement to us. Yeah, who's going to come up first? Is it... Yeah, Harsh, can I invite Mr. Mandar to come and speak to us, please? Thank you so much.
Friends, it's a pleasure to be here. I see some faces of very dear friends, and I see some students at the back, and I welcome all of you. We have 2 hours, and I hope we are able to talk together. Why the Karwan? Just a few words about that. India, like many countries across the globe, is passing through very difficult, fraught times. We're seeing country after country, people are electing leaders of a particular kind. These are leaders who and Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi represent them, but they are not alone. These are leaders who reflect, amplify, and legitimize bigotry, who thrive on divisive and polarizing politics. And we're seeing country after country veering further and further to the right, not just in terms of its economics, but much more, even more importantly, in the way it treats its minorities, whether they're minorities of color, whether they're religious minorities, whether they are immigrants, and whether they are sexual minorities of various kinds. We'll have occasion, I hope, this afternoon to talk in more detail, but I wanted to specifically just explain, many of you are not familiar with the Karwan, why We started almost exactly 1 year ago. In fact, about the time that we are speaking now, a year ago, I wrote an article in the Indian Express making an appeal for people to set out on this journey. Why? So on the one hand, what I saw was that there's never been a time when India, post-partition, post the partition riots, where India has been as divided as it is today. And going around the country, I found that fear has settled into the hearts and souls, particularly of our Muslim brothers and sisters in every corner of the country. So, I have almost half my colleagues at work over the years have tended to be Muslim. And they tell me, how their mothers now tell them, when you're traveling on a train, don't say Salam Alaikum, so that no one can recognize who you are. Don't let your beard grow too big. If there's a quarrel or a discussion, just stay out of it. This sense that you are living with fear as an everyday aspect of life troubled me hugely. And we also found that most political parties, up to a year ago, even those who call themselves secular political parties, tended to remain silent about this problem. I also found that although all across the world we are seeing people choosing authoritarian, right-wing, anti-minority governments, lynching is, the phenomenon of almost an epidemic of lynching that we see is unique to India. That the bigotry and hatred that is playing out through a series of lynch attacks on minorities and Dalits is something that is unique to India, and we need to recognize, acknowledge, understand, and I think we're just beginning to do so. So the Karwan was basically an attempt to find a way of responding to this rising tide of hate that we see around us. Darkness can never be fought with darkness. It only makes the darkness deeper. And therefore, how do you fight hate? You have to find a different grammar of engagement and of resistance, founded on love and solidarity. And what shape will that take? And so the idea came that we will travel across the country ceaselessly, visiting every family that has been hit by hate violence. This will not be a fact-finding, it will not be a reportage, it will not be a human rights meeting where you gather them on a stage and ask them to give testimonials. It is going into their homes like you would with a loved one of your family who has suffered this loss, to say that you are not alone and that we care, and that there are many people in this country who are with you in this moment where you have lost a loved one to hate. That was the central idea. There was the idea that we would also seek forgiveness on behalf of all of us. Forgiveness that you have had to suffer this because we have not been able to prevent India from becoming the country that it has today. We are all responsible. Inquiring about how their efforts for justice have unfolded, and whether they wish to pursue justice, and if so, whether they need our help, and how we can organize their fight for justice. This was one part of why and what we thought we'd do in the Karwan. And the other part was telling the story. Basically, it was important to tell the story. generation after generation of people in Germany asked their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, why did you let this happen? And one of the reasons that people continue to give is, but we did not know. And we were sure that we need to not allow that alibi to prevail. We will tell you. We are telling you. And we will continue to tell the stories. And therefore, I made an appeal for writers, filmmakers, photographers, storytellers to also join us. So on the one hand, we wanted people who could help with the pursuit of legal justice and engage with the families, and the other people who would tell the stories. And from that, this group came together, many people whom I had never met in my life, including Natasha here. And we started these journeys. This book is really the report that emerged of the first set of journeys over now, and then we resolved that we would continue to travel and continue to make these journeys until this continuing tempest of hate does not come to an end in our country. That's a promise that I've made to myself, that I will continue to travel at least to one new part of the country every month. And over these 12 months, we've completed 21 journeys. Just recently came back from Madhya Pradesh to 12 states, and we will continue to travel. So that was so this journey was, on the one hand, a voice of solidarity with people, assuring them that they're not alone in their suffering. And the other was a call of conscience. And I've said this, not just writing, we've been speaking in different places wherever anyone asks me to come. Something that I say is that this audience may be different. Many people do not like to hear what we have to say and the stories that we will talk about this afternoon. But I want to declare that we will continue to speak regardless until your conscience aches unbearably. And that's the second part of the mission. The mission is to share the suffering of those who have been hit by hate violence and to help them in the battles for justice. Incidentally, so it's not just about visiting, it's about once you visit a family, it's taking responsibility to help in their battles for justice. And it's never been done. We've sometimes fought when there's a communal riot. What is different between a communal riot and lynching? Communal riots, however grave they were, are bound by geography and by time. They happen in a particular location, they start and they end, and things slowly settle down. What lynching has done, it's an innovation which has broken both these boundaries of geography and time. So basically it communicates that now if you belong to that particular identity, you're no longer safe. You're not safe in your own home. Somebody can walk in and look at what's in your fridge or cooking on your stove. You're not safe traveling on a train. You're not safe at a workplace. You're not safe walking down the road. That message has been sent out. And so that's the big difference between lynching and communal violence. But the response from the perspective of legal justice, and if any law students are here, it was a huge challenge to fight the legal cases in Gujarat. Tista comes here. Tista, I and a few others have tried to organize massive response. And they were challenging, but they were in one location. What is really unprecedented is, there's a district called Nagaon in Assam where we started this journey, where 2 boys were lynched to death, and then there's North Dinajpur in Bengal, places I didn't even know of, where you go, 3 boys were lynched there, and across the country, it's Hapur here, it's coastal Karnataka. So we're having these incidents all across the country. And these are cases that have to be fought in lower courts in a situation in which almost in every case the police registers cases against the victim. So you're not only trying to hold accountable the accused who are being protected by the system, but you're actually trying to protect the victim from further persecution through the legal system. And you're trying to do this through lower courts dispersed all across the country. So these are the kinds of, so as I said, that was one part of, so not just visiting, but then standing and continuing to stand in solidarity with the families. And the other part is telling the story over and over again and saying, let us make sense, let us acknowledge, let us understand what we are becoming as a society. And we need to take responsibility. Yeah.
Can I invite Mr. John Dyer to speak now?
John, you'd like to speak from here?
No. Yesterday afternoon, Harsh and I were in Bhubaneswar, where we were part of a commemoration of 10 years of targeted violence against Christians in the very mountainous, deeply forested plateau called Kandamal. 60,000 people were homeless for a year, 30,000 of them in government refugee camps for close to that 1 year. 6,000 houses burnt, 320 churches, 450 villages burst of all Christians, maybe a dozen nuns raped. We were in Bhubaneswar also at a time when the same morning, an 81-year-old Jesuit priest and a friend of mine, Stan Swami, who has been working for 65 years as a student and a priest in the forests of Jharkhand, teaching, empowering tribals and Dalits, was searched. He's 81 and a victim of Parkinson's. He was humiliated, searched, questioned brutally for 12 hours from 6 a.m. in Ranchi. It was a coincidence. It was not a coincidence in many ways. We thought at that time in the evening to also speak not just of targeted violence, India wounded through hate rooted in religion and caste, but also in between somewhere, India also wounded by other things, the absence or the ignoring or the rejection of the rule of law, of a constitution. So I thought before I begin today, I will mention my own protest, and I think a collective protest at what happened yesterday. Take only marginal solace from the Supreme Court's ruling, some more perhaps from the Delhi High Court's ruling, and none at all from the judgment of the magistrate in Faridabad, not far from here, who thought because he had not been phoned up by the High Court in Chandigarh, he doesn't have to observe or obey the order of the High Court in Chandigarh. Such is life. So may I, with your permission, and even without it, register a collective protest at what happened yesterday. I wrote a letter in the evening to high-ups in the church in India that this has happened. Why has there been no statement from the church? One of your own is wounded. Civil society, as you want to create, the kingdom of God as you wish to create, has been wounded, and there is no statement. A well-wisher assures me now that one group of churches will register a complaint today, but will dilute it with a commiseration with the victims of the flood in Kerala, a natural disaster, affects beyond religions, victims, love jihad, and a larger issue of development in India. Fair enough. The Catholic Bishops' Conference of India, I'm told, will not register a protest. What does it have to do with Karwan Mohabat? Because in our year-long journey, we have noted a dissonance, a reluctance of groups, Muslim groups, Dalit groups, Christian groups mostly, to articulate whatever they're feeling, their anger, their frustration, their fear. You'll read about it in the papers, but on the ground, only the wounded cries, only the wailing for the dead from that bunch of people is heard. The neighbor is always, always silent. And for me, who sort of crosses the line between my ideology and the religion in which I was born 10 times a day, so I'm not very clear who I am in any given moment, I was shocked, absolutely shocked, at the total absence of empathy in the church in India. And I can extrapolate from the definition of church to also include the Hindu church, the Sikh church, the Muslim church, to the pain of the smaller people, pain of the other. And this is one thing which comes through. We are not only talking of police complicity, impunity of the state, hate from ministers and others, which fuels violence, which lets loose these canines. We are also talking of the fact that there is no organized resistance, there's no standing up, there's no calling to account, there's no documentation. We don't have a witness protection program, and we have not documented the course of these events in courts of law, but we have marginally documented the course of the crime through subordinate police and district magistrates in some cases, how cases are not registered or FIRs are filed. And that is another theme. The victim's victimhood is recorded less than the state and the majoritarian response to their agenda, in which it is not the boy who has been killed by a cow protector, which is the main event. It is the police case against the boy's father, his 3 brothers, their 4 cousins, and if possible, unconnected friends and neighbors. The overwhelming documentation then is cases by the state against the victim's family, associates, community, subsections of the village, on charges of being butchers and charges of being cow smugglers. And then something more frightening comes up. In the same area, in the Mewat region, and you're on the borders of it here, then you run across cases of the police then becoming the, what should I call them, the Gaurakshak. The police then becoming a guardian of ideology, of faith, of societal norms, you could call them, and then acting not in protection of the Constitution, not in obedience to the Criminal Procedure Code, not in defense and implementation of the Indian Penal Code, but defending a thesis that a political group wants them to. And then all of us here particularly run in Mewat into documented and undocumented cases of police firing at, killing, maiming people who they say are cow smugglers, who they say fired at the police, but on closer scrutiny, who are just Muslim boys. Cattle breeders, cattle owners, caught, the truck overturned, and then an additional case of causing injury to animals under the remnant of the Royal RSPCA Act, Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, in addition to whatever other laws there were. Sometimes the police bullet kills and not just maims. So this is a situation that we have documented to an extent through the human experience of the victims. How do they respond? And lastly, and it is shameful for us to say that, and for me, who was a professional journalist close to 5 decades in journalism, and a self-appointed member of civil society, is also the near absence of civil society, where it matters most. I mentioned about the church, but normal human rights activists, normal people who would come out on the road and demonstrate against atrocities in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and also on deforestation and the plight of the tiger, are absent when it is the plight of persons who are identified by their religion, by their eating habits, and for no other reason that some people fear that they will increase in numbers, unlike the tiger. And therefore, reconciliation is our own coming to grips with the pain of all this, with the bloodshed. People like me and Sukumar, who are journalists, we are used to documenting death, used to bodies, body counts, complaints of the plaintiffs. But to see not in a larger metadata graphic, but as individuals, each blood spot separate, each tear separate, is, I can assure you, an experience is important to go through, but reluctantly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dayal. Can I have Natasha speak, please?
Hello, my name is Natasha Karwan, and I became part of the Karwan Mohabat, like one of you might become part of the Karwan Mohabat after you hear about it or read about it or find out more about it. I've been a journalist with NDTV for the first 13 years of my career. I was a video journalist, and it was the most exciting years of my life when the news took us to all parts of India and to all parts of the world. But my initial excitement with what one felt was a very responsible job one was doing began to wane a little when you also began to weigh what impact your reporting, your journalism, your storytelling was having or not having on the lives of the people whose stories you were telling. You know, it made heroes out of us. We had great careers. Some of us became very popular. And we did well as an organization. One had that pride. But what was the contribution that one was making? That is a question that that rankled me enough for me to quit, full-time mainstream broadcast media and become an independent writer and a filmmaker, where I could choose how and where I wanted to write and film. And another 10 years later, when the climate, the political and socio-political climate of our times began to change very, very dramatically, radically, when the rise of Hindutva normalized lynchings and lynchings of people very, very close to home, in Dadri, in Alwar, in a train that had just left New Delhi railway station. the question in my mind was, what is the way to respond to this? What can one do? Because one was disturbed, one was mourning, one was very, very unhappy. But what can be my response? How can I contribute towards restoring the world that I believe we deserve to live in, that I believe that I need to show my children is possible? And in that kind of helplessness came Harsh's first call, where it was a crowdfunding appeal, where they announced the Karwan Mohabat, and he said that we are just going to go to the homes of people who have been victimized by hate crime and who have not received justice, who have not received any succor either from the local administration or the state, who owe them justice. And that was the first thing that inspired me to join the Karwan. I did not think that I would be with it for a whole year. I thought I was joining it for a short stint. The other reason I felt that I wanted to leave my home and go to the location where the hate was being acted out was because one needed to break down this artificial boundary between us and them. This wall, very, very protective wall of our class, caste, economic privilege that kind of lets you off if you outrage enough, if you grieve enough for a short period of time, and then you can go back to doing important things because you have to live your life. And I felt that that I needed to do more than that. And what I'll tell you is what I got from the experience of the Karwan. The first time I traveled with the Karwan, I joined them in Delhi, and we traveled to Uttar Pradesh, Shamli. We went to a Dalit basti that had been attacked by Rajputs. We met families of Muslim men who had been lynched. We went to Mewat, Rajasthan, Gujarat. And coming face to face with the grieving parents, with wives who had, some women who had married the younger brother of the person who had been killed, just so that she still had a roof over her head. Meeting the siblings of people who had been lynched, just the coming face to face with the mindlessness of those deaths, in some way woke up a kind of dormant humanity, which had been numbed from years of looking at violence only through the media, only through one's own social media devices, and having this distance where you can feel bad, but not bad enough. And that's primarily been my Karwan experience. We didn't set out to write a book, but we went on recording what we saw, what we experienced. And out of that came this book, Reconciliation, the first part of which is entirely written by Harsh Mandar, which is his diary, his documentation of homes that we visited in each state. The second part is essays by various travelers who joined the Karwan. So we've got one essay by Professor Vishnu from IM Trichy, where he talks about corporate India's response or the lack of it to hate crime. We have essays by Priya Ramani, who talks about, which is titled Who Killed Pehlu Khan. We have an essay by me, we have an essay by John Dayal on, so it's a diverse response of various people who joined the Karwan. The third is the diary of Karwan travelers. What is it that brought them? What is it that they experienced? How has it touched their lives? What are they likely to do next? And the fourth part is called Two Fathers, which is how we end the book. And before I hand over to you, I'd like to read out one of the life stories that this book records. This is in Harsh's voice. We mounted the stairs of the tranquil 200-year-old Nurani Mosque in West Bengal's coal city of Asansol with trepidation.
what could one say to a man who had just lost his 16-year-old son to a hate mob that would bring him any kind of solace? The Imam of the mosque, Maulana Imdadullah Rashidi, was seated on a mat, his head bowed, composed. He held our hands by turn, accepting with grace our ineffectual words of sympathy. Imam Rashidi's father had migrated from Samastipur to Bihar, in Bihar to Asansol when he had been only a child. His father served for much of his life as the Imam in a mosque in a colliery near Asansol. Rashidi was appointed the Imam of the Nurani Mosque 30 years earlier, and since then his life had circled around the mosque as he led its prayers 5 times every day and served his community. This story by now is well known. Asansol had not witnessed communal violence in 26 years. Never in the past had Ram Navami, the spring festival celebrating the birth of Lord Ram, been an occasion for mass public festivities in Bengal or of processions on the streets. This had changed over the past couple of years when BJP workers, the RSS and associated organizations converted the religious event into an occasion for the display of belligerent communal militancy, aggressive display of weapons, and incendiary anti-Muslim sloganeering. For days following Ram Navami that year, processions had been organized consecutively in different parts of the state, each time passing through Muslim colonies and mosques while playing loud music and shouting provocative slogans. The processions were of men in saffron bandanas on foot or riding motorcycles or in small trucks, displaying swords and screaming feverishly that Muslims would have to shout Jai Shri Ram or fall to the sword, and that there were only 2 fit destinations for a Muslim, Pakistan or a cemetery. It was a riot waiting to happen, a classic manufactured riot. The processionists were itching for a bite. It was not long before some hot-headed young Muslim men rose to the bait and raged at the taunts and provocations. Their heated arguments rapidly deteriorated into fistfights, and before long, blood began to flow as mobs of young men set fire to shops and homes. The state administration and police could not credibly explain why they allowed armed processions with loudspeakers spouting hate to pass through Muslim residential areas. Reports to Scroll confirm also that the police arrived too late to control the riotous mobs. When they did arrive, they discharged tear gas shells to disperse the crowds. People ran in all directions in panic. One among the fleeing crowds was a teenager, Sibghatullah Rashidi, the 4th son of Imam Rashidi. He had recently written his high school exams and awaited his results. His father was proud that the boy had memorized the entire Quran and had been honored with the title Hafiz. That afternoon, he was studying at his madrasa, which stood close to a Hindu settlement when the rioting broke out. He rushed out in panic to return to the safety of his home, but in the melee and tear gas fog, he lost his bearings and ran instead into the neighboring Hindu colony. In time, curfew was imposed, and parents on both sides of what was now called the border anxiously counted their children. It turned out that 2 Hindu children had been captured by men in the Muslim settlement, and 1 boy, Sibghatullah Rashidi, had been confined by the Hindus. It became an archetypical mutual hostage situation with neither side willing to let go of their captive until the other side returned theirs. The police sought the intervention of the Imam, and he was firm. There can be no conditions, he said. We cannot hold these 2 petrified Hindu children. Let them be returned safely to their parents. We hope that our boy will also be restored. Meanwhile, he waited anxiously for his own son's return. It was near midnight when the counselor called the Imam with the grim news that the police had found the mutilated body of a teenage boy who was probably his son. The Imam said to him, "Don't announce to anyone that my son has been killed. It is night. If people get to know, hot-headed boys will attack the Hindus in the darkness. I will myself tell them in the morning." Desolate in the certainty that his own young son had been killed, Maulana Imdadullah Rashidi sat in the mosque through that long, dark night, alone with his memories, his torment, and his prayers. Early the next morning, after the first azan for the sunrise, Fajr namaz rang out. The faithful gathered in the mosque. He broke the tragic news to them that his son had been killed. But he also made an impassioned plea that stunned them. "If you love me," he said, "then I ask from you at this moment only one promise, that with your tongue and with your hand, none of you will cause any harm to any Hindu." There was not a dry eye as they listened to his impassioned plea. The Imam then reclaimed his boy's body from the mortuary and bathed it in preparation for the funeral. It was impossible for the father, composed so far, to hold back his tears. The boy's nails had been pulled out, one eye smashed, his body full of stab wounds, and portions of it burnt. I saw the photograph of the mutilated body of the boy taken before he was buried. Most of the young men in the Muslim settlement in Shitla Dangal area around the Nurani Mosque had grown from boyhood to manhood before the Imam's eyes. They loved and respected him. Therefore, his counsel against revenge was like cool water over the fires that stirred in their breasts. The Hindustan Times reported that, inspired by the Imam's sermon, local Muslim youth started guarding shops and property belonging to the small number of Hindu families that lived near the Nurani Mosque. Mehtab Alam, a local resident who greatly revered Imam Rashidi, told the reporter, "After Sibgatullah's body was found, some youths got furious, but we calmed them down. Not a single house, shop, or the Shiva temple was attacked." R.K. Verma, a local jeweler, testified that his Muslim neighbors protected his shop. "I was not in town when the riots took place. I was very scared because there was valuable jewelry inside. But when I called up, my neighbors assured me that everything would be safe," he said to the reporter. But who can still the agony of a parent's heart? When the team of the Karwan Mohabat met him in his room in the mosque, 10 days had passed, and the Imam said to us that he did not want to open his wounds, they were still fresh. "For 30 years I have spoken of the teachings of Islam to my people here. When my son was killed, it was a moment of test for me by Allah. I have lost my son, but not my Iman, my faith. It was Allah who showed me the right path. Islam teaches peace, compassion. It teaches us to help one another, not to oppress another human being." He added, "Every religion teaches peace and love." One member from our team said to him, "What you did is very rare." His response was sharp and immediate. "It is not rare. I am sure many others in my position would have done what I did. You came to know me because my son died, but I am sure that the large majority of Muslims and Hindus wish to live together only in peace and love."
Thank you for that reading that extract from the book. I will tell you a little bit about what I have undergone after having read this book, and then we'll have a Q&A among us for around 30 minutes, and then open it out to the audience. This book did not come to me in physical copy form. It came to me as a PDF, and I've been with it for a week. I've not slept for a week. I've not slept for a week because this book is full of episodes like these. There are books in the world which are meant to punch the reader into submission, to upset the reader, to rid the reader of all of his or her illusions about their privilege and about their position in society. And this book does that by just reporting the facts. If the facts of life in India are so horrifying, are so gruesome, many of our, I think, illusions about what we are as Indians get completely smashed in one go. Page after page, and the first section of the book, which recounts the Karwan Mohabat's experiences of going to different parts of India, is disturbing enough. What makes the book even more disturbing is actually when many of the participants begin sharing their own experiences. And I don't want to spoil anything further, but there is one chapter in this book written by a 23-year-old young journalist called Nidhi Suresh. It's 4 pages. I read it this morning. I've not been able to be steady. I'll tell you why I've not been able to be steady, because this person is a 23-year-old young journalist who spent 5 months in Kashmir. She spent 5 months in Kashmir and she's moved to Delhi. Her editor has told her there's something called a Karwan Mohabat happening. Why don't you join the bus? She goes in the bus. She's someone who does not have the experience of many of these other participants over the journey. And there's one moment where they've gone into, I think, Haryana somewhere, and she knows she's met somebody who's going to say something extremely disturbing to her. It's, I think, a moment which just utterly shook me up, and that's exactly what happens later on. She describes it. Can we just go through that? I can read it out. It's on page 108. She's a 23-year-old journalist from Bangalore called Nidhi Suresh, and it took not only remarkable skill, it took remarkable maturity to say it in such words. The moment we visited the first family, I realized I wasn't going to be able to bring forth my audio recorder, ask questions or take down notes. Things were happening before I could grasp the context, but I felt a dissonance that made me uncomfortable. We moved from one family to another, spending 20 minutes or so with each. I made a decision to stay in the background. I appointed myself as the wallflower of the Karwan Mohabat. Then something happened. We were in the Mewat region of Haryana. 30 of us had huddled into the courtyard of a Muslim family who had lost their son in a police encounter. Mandar and a few others were talking to the father. Some were clicking pictures of the children and some were clicking pictures with them. I had positioned myself at the gate. It was scorching hot and my back hurt from the travel. Then I saw her. From the moment she took a step, I knew she was heading towards me. Her pale blue sari had seen too much sun. Her frail frame looked in dire need of some rest. Her walk was cautious, but her eyes seemed to scan the people gathered there. I saw her from the corner of my eye, but didn't want to acknowledge her. Acknowledgement would mean I was open to listening, and I wasn't, and I couldn't. She walked over and stood by me. She wasn't in a hurry to tell a story, or maybe she sensed my fear. I don't know. I was scared. I was so scared she would tell me a story that I wouldn't be able to respond to, a story that would require me to say it's okay when I couldn't and it wasn't. And she did. She told me of her son and the morning after his death. As she spoke, I looked down the whole time, not daring to look her in the eye. After she finished, she reached out and held my hand. It almost seemed like she was comforting me for everything I couldn't do or be. I stood there with all my privilege, inadequacy and inefficiency, feeling completely undeserving of her confidence or the comfort she seemed to be offering. I couldn't even offer 3 curled fingers around her palm. The piece is called The 3 Curled Fingers I Couldn't Offer. So there are things like these which happen in the book fairly often, and it makes for deeply, deeply unsettling reading. And because it is so unsettling, it is, I think, required reading for every thinking Indian. And because Indians at the moment need to be unsettled, they need to be shaken up, they need to be confronted with these things which we have deliberately avoided looking at. And I think over the next, 15, 20 or 30 minutes, I would want to pose these kinds of questions and then later on open it out to the audience. So my first question to all three of you again, and you all are free to respond as in when you wish. There was one talk by Mr. Mandar, which he delivered earlier this year. It's a TED talk, and it's on the idea of Indian people's indifference. Why are we so apathetic to the suffering of others, to the suffering of people around us? And there's so much of suffering around us. My first question to you, sir, if you could briefly tell us what's the nature of this construct called Indian indifference? Yeah, please, sir. You can take this.
Noam Chomsky had visited India a few years ago. He said, I've never seen a country, driving down the streets of Delhi, I've never seen a country where poverty is so dramatically manifest. And I've never also seen a people who have so much of a capacity to see and look away. What troubles me about India is not only enormous inequalities, the preventable suffering that we see around us. What troubles me most is the fact that we don't care. And you talk about hate violence, but just illustratively, India, I work also a lot on the questions of hunger and the right to food. As Commissioner of the Supreme Court, I've actually, before the journeys of the Karwan, I've probably been to again 100 families which have lost people to starvation. And they can be statistics for us, they can be a news report somewhere, but what does life look like to you if you're a parent who cannot feed your child? And there's nothing you can do about it. And I recall these Musahar women who told me once that the most painful lesson of all that they have to teach their children is of how to sleep hungry. And I have to sit your child down and say, there are many nights when I'm not able to give you food. And you have to learn how to sleep hungry. When the first time when I heard this, I have a daughter whom I love a lot. She's now older. And I thought, what would life have looked like to me if I had to teach this most terrible lesson to my child? I think a lot about empathy, and I realize that empathy is first an act of imagination, and only then an act of feeling. I think we've constructed an India where we just don't have an imagination. Again, working with homeless people. The first time we created a shelter for homeless women, I asked the women what has changed most in your life. And I remember this woman saying that for the first time in say 17 years, when I close my eyes at night, I'm sure that no one is going to rape me until the morning. Now, just in terms of imagination, even for the men in this room, I don't think we'll ever be able to imagine what life would have looked like to us. If for 17 years, I slept every night knowing that somebody is likely to come and rape me, and I don't have a place of safety where I can go to protect myself. There's no police station that I can go to where I will get protection. There's nothing I can do about it except to endure. But even for the women in this room, one act of this kind and we get scarred for life. What about 17 years? So I believe that we've created a world, and in India, we're particularly skillful at building a world where you just don't, the lives of others don't matter. I think I see this all across. I wrote this book called Looking Away. Inequality, prejudice, and indifference. One striking thing was that I've been asked to speak about it in many parts of the world. After every single such discussion, people come to me and say, but you were writing about India, but it's also about France, it's also about the US, it's also about Brazil, it's also about... I think it's part of what we have become in why is India one of the only countries which has not invested in the education, in just basic primary education or healthcare? I mean, something that we have the resources many times over to be able to do it. And the increase in wealth, or just the increase in the wealth of India's millionaires, just the increase in wealth in 1 year was more than the entire union budget of India. We have the wealth, but we don't spend it because the lives of the poor don't matter. And I think it is that same lack of empathy and egalitarian compassion. Compassion for me is very important for me to talk about. I think of it, it's not somebody here and somebody receiving or compassion here. It's about two human beings as equals meeting each other and recognizing that the other has had a very difficult life to stay and earn. So it is that lack of our capacity for egalitarian compassion that we have developed culturally. And that is why, perhaps why lynching can happen on this scale and we don't care.
Mr. Dayal?
Could you just call me John?
Yeah, John. Yeah.
Let me take it from where he lives and let me reconnect it with something just to do with his journey to Kandamala again. 2 short stories. In 2008, I told you, 60,000 people displaced, 30,000 lived in camps, almost 3,000 per camp. So this is the story of the camp in Barakama, in the middle of Kandamala, where 3,000 people were there, guarded by India's premier police force called the Central Reserve Police Force. It's the Central Ground Police Force. It used to be called the Ground Police Force once upon a time. Refugee camps are, to prevent them from being attacked, the perimeter is of barbed wire. And there's a gate. There's a police party at the gate, keep monitoring who goes in and who goes out. They were there for close to a year. And the company of police was also there close to a year. Over a period of time, you develop an empathy with the policemen. So what happens? 2 stories. One filmed on record. One policeman falls in love with a girl, goes to her parents, marries the girl. The grateful parents give him a huge dowry. He takes the dowry, lives with the girl for 3 weeks, is posted out, never ever returns. There's a woman there waiting, suddenly realizing she has been had. The other case which I documented, wrote about, is worse. There's a trade-off between the Havaldar, the sergeant, and the women. They have to go out. They have to go out to get the little medicine for the children, something for themselves, possibly a bar of soap. And you won't let anybody into the camp, and therefore you won't let anybody out of the camp. And there's a trade-off again. So in a refugee camp, where the government of India has ordered the police to guard people displaced from their homes, policemen are exploiting the women there. Exploiting sexually, of course. This is the state acting. We can't complain. We go 10 years later, Harsh and I, and the rest of us, we go to all the places, we see the suffering, see the total lack of injustice, and we come back to Bhubaneswar. Harsh is a very famous man, and at least to journalists are not unknown. We call for a press conference. The local civil society helps us call every journalist in town. They even buy coffee, not coffee, tea, and samosas, which I go to get at some time. We wait, and we wait, and we wait some more. We wait for 2 hours. Not one journalist in the city of Bhubaneswar, in the state of Orissa, turns up. Not one. It can't be. There will be a stray trainee, there will be some journalists barge in uninvited. There's never been a press conference on earth where not a single journalist turns up. How do we explain the total lack of interest sometimes of people? And he has not explained to you what happens to us in Assam or what happens to me away from the Karwan in some of the states. They not only will not participate, coming like the three fingers, it disturbs the conscience, reminds them that they are complicit, because they are complicit, and that is the whole thing. On 1 January 2008, in between two bouts of violence in Karwan, because of this need for a VIP to have a press conference, I flew Mahesh Bhatt down to Bhubaneswar. And we held a press conference in a hotel to speak of hate and violence. Every journalist in town came. 10 minutes into the press conference, the media got angry. They said, by talking about communal violence in the holy state of Orissa, home to and the little girls, you are maligning the state of Orissa. That is what it is. You are no longer talking of cancer, you're not talking of various ailments, in my case, insulin-dependent diabetes. You are, by pointing out that the body has an ailment and needs medical care, you're maligning the sovereignty, the holiness, the God creation that is the body of the state of the body. This is what is come to. This is why the government, the ruling party, the leader, have come to be identified with motherland, with India, with the goddess Bharat Mata. And this is a problem with documenting it and why people don't react. And lastly, and I wish to say this on record, as a terrible Christian, but still born into the religion, the psyche of the minority has not been fully, in a complex situation like India, been fully analyzed even by social psychologists and public philosophers, and I noticed Shiv and others. What is the journey within the community? The fear, the journey. This is like the Russian troika. You begin your journey and you keep on sacrificing a horse when the wolves chase you every 200 kilometers so that the wolves will take him on and you will reach destination. In the Christian community, social organization, and please remember we have some of the best social organizations, including human rights organizations, have been silenced not by the government we had, not by these lousy ministers, by ourselves. Don't speak one by one, they have been silenced. The community feels crushed and afraid even to cry. And this I can tell you is true also of the Muslim community. They will shout hoarse, the Muslim person or more, on something trivial like Tilmudala. But when it comes to a larger thing like yesterday, for 24 hours now, there's silence. We need to understand why have we been crushed so much that we can't even breathe, can't even try to wriggle out, try to run for safety because car like a pigeon with all this cat staring at us. This needs to be studied because if somebody prescribes some mechanism through which you can heal yourselves, then find courage to challenge, then find courage to hope, to extend 3 current fingers to somebody else, and then somebody else will. And I think this fracture, this shattering of communities themselves is something to be studied and pondered about. I notice it in the Dalits, I notice it in Christians for sure, because I'm studying them both from the outside and from the inside. And I've also studied it of the Sikhs.